Chapter 1. Dreams Bloom in the Sunlight of the Mind. Kenji Lek was simply too exhausted to continue. The blaring car horns at 6 in the morning, the bustling streets, the commuters living halfway inside of their phone screens, clearing away his brain fog with copious amounts of caffeine. Kenji was convinced that brain fog was just a symptom of the mind control hidden in the form of the polluted New York City air. Whenever he spoke that aloud at work parties like the one he was currently attending, he sounded ridiculous. However, if anyone in the city ever cared to look up, they would most definitely see the cloud of pollutants lingering above the skyscrapers. Its menacing shade saps away any sense of health and well-being, yet no one sees it because we're too busy looking down, Kenji said rather drunkenly. Down at what, you ask? The girl that sat next to Kenji hadn't asked. In fact, she hadn't even been truly listening at all. Instead, she was more fascinated with his eyes, his irises to be exact. Kenji's eyes were swirls of gold that danced like pools of light before returning to their verdant green. It was a rare thing and certainly something she hadn't seen before. With every sip of sake he took, the golden light would flare up again as if the rice wine was being poured straight into the pools themselves. And that's why I'm leaving next month. I've already been saving up. Kenji finished with a defiant grin upon his face. Sorry, leaving where? The girl asked, her cheeks flushing red as the wine she held. To Ryokinosha, he answered, not really talking to her or anyone in particular other than himself. I'm done with the head chef giving me bad fish. I'm done being limited in what I can do. I'm going to start my own sushi restaurant. In Kenji's mind, applause broke out at his announcement, and balloons fell from a trapdoor in the ceiling, balloons shaped like sushi. The partygoers would be stunned, excited, and jealous all at once. His dad would suddenly knock on the door, and upon opening it, would finally say, I'm proud of you, son. None of that happened, but saying it out loud, especially in front of others, solidified the fact that he couldn't back out. If he did, everyone would then ask, hey man, what happened to leaving New York? All talk and no walk, huh? But Kenji had watched his father prepare sushi ever since he was young. He was lucky enough to study and learn the techniques from a true master, even if young Kenji had barely been able to see above the kitchen counter. With every roll that Kenji's father prepared, the golden pools in the old man's eyes would glow like sunlight. So what do you think about that? Kenji asked, finally speaking to the woman directly. But she was staring down at her phone and didn't hear a word he said. And so, a month later, Kenji made his final preparations to leave. He sold or gave away most of his winter clothing. The tropical humidity in Ryokinosha would be stifling anyway. To his surprise, he was able to fit most of his belongings into one bag of luggage in his favorite travel backpack. The backpack had been his companion on most of his international adventures ever since college. It had been his pillow during restless nights on frigid airport linoleum, and although the zippers were crusted shut from the air, it still managed to hold everything it needed to. He's able to pass his rent over to an old friend Joseph, and Kenji gladly shared the tips and tricks of living in the cramped apartment. He told Joe about the elderly neighbors down the hall whose limbs were slowly but surely sprouting tufts of grass and wildflowers. At first, the elderly couple panicked like any normal people would, but when they discovered that their daily morning walks now gave them a rush of energy they hadn't felt since their youth, they soon grew to love their abnormalities. When Kenji had first moved in, he promised to help water them weekly, and now it had become a bit of a tradition, awkward as it was. Awkward for Kenji, at least, for the elderly outgrow awkward. He warned Joseph about the ghost that lived in his closet and educated him on how to know when ghosts in general were present. Wind slams doors shut, while ghosts usually just close them nicely, his father had said. If in the dead of night you hear a door slam, it's likely just the wind, but if you hear a door simply close, it's probably a ghost. Or a burglar in your house, Kenji would reply as he grew older. And finally, Kenji told Joseph about the toilet that didn't flush properly. Kenji's toughest challenge, however, would be to quit his job at the 5-star sushi restaurant he'd worked at for 7 years. He'd always had a bit of a dramatic flair, so on his final day, he had everything already planned out. The night before, he had snuck into the kitchen and taken the freshest ingredients he could find, the ones that his boss refused to let him use. He then spent his whole night preparing the most delicious sushi rolls one could imagine. He loved infusing fresh fruit into his sushi just as his father had done. Pomegranates, mango, and dragon fruit lined each roll in a flurry of bright colors. He worked until he was exhausted and stored the sushi away for the next morning when all of his work would finally come to fruition. More like fruition, he said aloud from his bed. He heard the ghost snicker inside the closet, and proud of himself, Kenji dozed off to sleep. He rose at dawn. In his work bag, he carried a bunch of business cards he had made, along with some homemade fireworks that his sister's son, Han, had constructed. They were just small poppers that you tossed at the ground, colorful and loud, but completely harmless. Before the restaurant opened at 11 in the morning, Kenji stored his pre-made sushi rolls in a hidden part of the fridge. Work began as always, and the customers slowly shuffled in, ordering the same typical rolls that Kenji had mindlessly crafted for years. However, today would be different. Unbeknownst to the rest of the kitchen, after each roll was served, Kenji would sneak out to the tables and trade the plain rolls for his own exquisite creations. He would whisper things kindly and quietly, such as a gift from the chefs for loyal returning customers, or more simple phrases like, "Our apologies, that was the incorrect order." At first, the customers were upset when Kenji took their original plates away from them, but what Kenji replaced them with made both their eyes and their mouths water. With each of his heartfelt creations he placed down, he also set down his business card. He moved fast. Kenji knew he didn't have a lot of time before the kitchen caught on to what was happening. But no matter what happened, he already knew it was his last day, and that made him feel reckless. He bowed dramatically as he served each roll and poured soy sauce from the table to as high up as his arm could reach. Table by table, customer by customer, he slowly transformed the entire place into his very own Kenji's Sushi. When cheers erupted and the kitchen finally realized what was happening, Kenji made a break for it. He raced for the door as he dug through his work backpack, pulling free a handful of Han's fireworks. He lit the central one using a dragon-themed incense burner and tossed the cluster into the center of the room. The customers' faces went from admiration to horror in an instant, but when the fireworks exploded in a harmless burst of colors, they paused and cheered even louder. With a final bow towards the place where he had worked for so many long years, he tossed one last business card into the air and turned to run. He imagined it floating coolly to the ground in slow motion and somehow burning up in the fireworks. What he didn't know was that the card actually fluttered immediately back towards him and actually managed to land in his pants pocket again. Sometimes life is strange like that. So he ran, laughing wildly, ignoring the strange looks from the clusters of people in the streets. He stopped to catch his breath with his back pressed against a boba tea shop window, and only then did he feel the business card in his pocket once again. He pulled it free, studying it with confusion. It read, Kenji's Sushi, with a number at the bottom. His phone number. That's all he really had to offer. No menu, no actual address. As his adrenaline ebbed away, the reality of his situation struck him, and the pools of light in his eyes faded ever so slightly. One thing was for sure, he couldn't turn back now.